So one of the things that I discussed with Novara Media about the problems with the Grenfell tragedy is that it is essentially all downwind of deregulation under neoliberalism. Neoliberal deregulation is what caused people, A, within the capitalist sector, for treating people's lives like an externality. Why let potential fire risks get in the way of profit? Because the profit motive and market transactions do not treat human lives as relevant. It's not that they want people to lose their lives, it's that they don't care if they do because profit is more important. Private companies have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders to drive value, and if people lose their lives as a consequence, that gets in the way of profits. Which is why you need proper government regulation. Even under a capitalist or social democratic system, you need government regulation to ensure that externalities are curtailed. Whether or not this comes in terms of lives that get risks due to fire safety, or whether it comes to how much smog that you pollute, or how much you destroy the ozone layer through the emitting of certain kind of chemicals, or whether you increase the carbon dioxide threshold because of releasing certain chemicals, because these are not part of your market transaction and are a negative externality. Trying to deal with negative externality should be the role of central government, however, or local government too. However, in the Conservative Party's case, since 2010, they did slash and burn removal of regulations, the bonfire of red tape, as David Cameron called it at the time. And for that entire period, we just got deregulation after deregulation, which of course made them likely to be more negative externalities in terms of collapsing buildings, anything that was a problem for fire safety. Eric Pickles, in the Grenfell inquiry specifically, said that we actually didn't have fire safety precautions as part of our deregulatory agenda. But his statement was rejected by the inquiry, saying that actually fire safety standards were impeded by the deregulatory agenda of the coalition and Cameron governments during the slash and burn deregulation period. Now, an ex-Tory MP was on the Jeremy Vine show earlier on today with Gemma Forte from the Troll podcast, who, despite me being indifferent to her being a bit of a liberal, I think she's somebody who has her heart in the right place, and I think she makes good content trying to bring people to a more left-wing perspective. But regardless, this is what they had to say on the matter on Jeremy Vine's show.
I worry that some of the businesses that you mentioned, some of the people who run it seem to live overseas.
Yeah, well, I think it's odd. Arconic have come back and said, we did not conceal information or mislead. Celotex say they've reviewed and improved the marketing of their products. Kingspan say, yes, there were wholly unacceptable historic failings. I don't know. I don't think it's appropriate for them to be making these comments after this long inquiry.
Sort of ridiculous corporate nothing, I agree.
Yeah.
And what's really frightening is I believe, and I could be wrong, but I was looking today, 4,500 buildings still have this type of cladding on them.
Well, that's another thing.
Now, that is something that should have been just dealt with instantly, in my mind, like as a massive priority. The people living in those buildings must live in fear of a fire.
Some of them are privately owned.
Yeah.
I mean, this is...
And this is the problem as well, is that our government was in league with the private companies. The Conservative Party are the electoral wing of the corporations and of the private sector. That is what the Conservative Party exists to do in society, is to do what is best for business, not what's best for people. They do not have societal utility as part of their worldview or as part of their electoral raison d'etre, which is why they were allowed to get into a position where they allowed these private companies to be able to put up all of this cladding regardless of the fire safety risks because of their deregulatory agenda. And this is why poor people were the ones who ended up facing the brunt of it. It's why in the Conservative Control Council, the TMO, treated the residents like a problem to be managed rather than people who were in their care, because they didn't see them as people who were relevant, because they weren't part of the private sector whose bidding they are there to do. That is the problem with neoliberalism as a whole. This market fundamentalism does not care for negative externalities and does not care about the utility of protecting human life.
This becomes another issue. Does the government pay for cladding on a privately owned block of flats?
It's not easy, and also you have a problem with where you don't own the lease.
Yeah.
You know, so the crazy system that we have, that's one thing that we should get rid of, is this business where you can have a flat and then somebody owns the lease of the flat. So who's actually responsible for dealing with it? But there have been one or two things that I think progress, because there's been building legislation, there's been fire safety legislation and regulations to protect social tenants. A little bit of progress has been made, but they've got to go after these guys and these awful corporate statements that you
Yeah.
mentioned. And it is, you know, I'm a conservative, but this is the kind of so-called vulture capitalism that I absolutely hate, and
Yeah.
it damages what I believe in. And to me, if I was a conservative leader, I would be running for conservative leader at the moment. I would be making a speech on this and accepting responsibility from our government when we were in power and previous governments, but also to say what they would do to stop this sort of thing happening again, because this is what the public want. I would rather that.
So it's clear that the penny has dropped for this guy. A real "are we the baddies" moment. The one thing that I dislike, he says, ex-Conservative MP, during the entirety of the coalition period and the Cameron years no less. What I don't like is this kind of vulture capitalism that our party supports. The Conservative Party has literally always been the vulture capitalism party, especially since the advent of Thatcherism and neoliberalism. You were in government when the slash and burn deregulatory agenda was being put forward by David Cameron. You were the party of vulture capitalism. You were the electoral wing of vulture capitalism. I'm glad that you think that your government should essentially have to apologise for something that is mostly their fault alongside the private sector. Again, who they represent in terms of their electoral ideology. But how can you say, well, I'm a conservative at heart, but I dislike vulture capitalism? This is conservative ideology. This is conservatism writ large. The belief in unmitigated capitalism is how the Conservative Party has operated for the entirety of the time that you have been a member of the party. It's been like this for 45 years. How has it taken you this long? How has it taken you seeing huge swathes of people burned to death at Grenfell for you to say, well, maybe this party has got off on the wrong footing? And now you have an entire slate of candidates in the Conservative Party, all believing in further deregulation, further support for the vulture capitalism that you now decry as being something dreadful. And I agree with you. I'm actually really glad that you're now around to our way of thinking and realising that this is a problem. But if you really think this is a problem, if you believe in the conservation of our country, if you believe in promoting British values or whatever other kind of paternalistic or one-nation conservatism, then your life is outside of the Conservative Party. I'm sorry. Join the Liberal Democrats. Join the Social Democratic Party. Go and start some new Conservative Party that's actually one nation and is actually about some kind of settlement between the people in government rather than the electoral wing of the private sector. Because if it's taken you this long to realise that that's the case, after all of the people who died during austerity, after all the people who've been negatively affected by Conservative Party policy ever since Thatcher decided to throw our country into shock therapy, Yeltsin style, like people keep saying that Russia and Boris Yeltsin's shock therapy agenda was the experiment that was used on the rest of the world. No, we were the experiment. Thatcherism and as shock therapy was tried on the UK first and then exported to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. We were the ones who decided to sell off huge amounts of government-owned sectors, bargain basement to the private sector, such as not just things like what we're seeing with construction, but you look at the water industry, you look at all of these other things that have been privatized and have been used to siphon money into the pockets of the super rich and forgetting utility. Think about what happened when we privatized the rail network. We privatized the rail network and suddenly all of these crashes, the Potter's Bar incident was a direct result of the privatization of our rail network being lax on standards in terms of maintenance in search of private profit. They cut the maintenance regime because it would cost them money and would make their profits lower, and it led to the Potter's Bar rail disaster that had to bring Railtrack back into public ownership. If you couldn't see that after Potter's Bar, and you have to wait until Grenfell to see that, I'm glad that you're around on our side, but to quote one of the greatest things Sweden has ever produced, The Hives, I hate to say I told you so. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.